Friday, Shiloh Institute moment, and the interpretation of God. The interpretation of God. You know, many of us don't realize how interpretive we are, and interpretive meaning that we can listen to something and hear two completely different things. We can attempt to do something and do two completely different things. For example, what does love look like? If I said to a room full of people, what does love look like to you? We would have a lot of different answers. Everybody knows what the word love means, but interpreting it, the application of what that means to you would be very, very different. Many people in your life have told you, hopefully, I love you. Many. And if you had to write a paper on what that person's love was like, many of you might come to the conclusion that A, they really loved you, B, they never loved you, C, you're not sure if that's what love really is, D, they loved you as best they could. But what you wouldn't probably do is come to a consensus in respect to all of those people, in respect to how they demonstrated love to you. If you're being very honest and being very empirical with that information. So the same thing applies to us when we're dealing with God. I could ask you some very basic things. Do you believe in God? Do you believe that there's one supreme God? Do you believe, and many of you would say, yes, I believe in God. Yes, I believe there's one supreme God. Do you believe that He has the power to control your life? And many of you would say yes. Some people might say no. Believe that the God of the Bible is that one supreme God. We start dividing up. Well, do you believe that God operates within the context of religion? Oh, well, do you believe that God is religious? And then so those very few questions now, I've created multiple ideological religious opinions. I could have created multiple churches based on those few questions, because people are extremely interpretive. And so our question today, speaking to us under the context of in a religious conversation, is how do we interpret God? How do we interpret that being, that concept, and then how do I interpret that and apply that to my life today? That's a heck of a thing. How do I interpret that as a black man? How do I interpret that as a black woman? How do I interpret that as an Asian man, as a white man? Do these things change? How do I interpret that as a Gentile? How do I interpret that as a Hebrew? Do these things change because of who I see myself as? Does my interpretation of him change? And the answer is unequivocally yes. It's a yes. If you are a Hebrew man or woman, you believe that you have a different purpose when it comes to the application of interpreting what God means for you. And you have your I call them religious secularists, who they aspire to a belief in God, and but they don't really adhere to any one specific religion per se, or they might lean towards one religion, but they don't practice it very strongly. They have an interpretation of what God is for them too. They're a generalist. You know, they might create their own worldview based on their generalist interpretation. I believe in God, but I believe that we are free moral agents, and essentially we're here to do good. And if I'm not hurting anybody, I don't think God has a problem with that. That's a religion right there. You've created a whole idea, a whole ideology. You've created a whole approach to life based on those things. And then you have, of course, your very religious who have picked very specific things to believe in. And once they've picked those very specific things to believe in, anything outside of those things are sin. So, let's have that ugly conversation. We've seen there's an African American pastor, apostle. I'm not going to say his name just for the sake of not saying his name. But he was caught on social media. I believe it's a Snapchat video went around. And he was, I believe the video, I didn't see the video. I didn't search out to look for the video. I heard, and maybe my information is not 100% right, but my understanding is that he was performing oral sex in the video. He was having a sexual experience with a man. Same-sex experience, African-American man, very charismatic pastor, good old-fashioned religion-type pastor, apostle, bishop, whatever titular thing he required to call himself. And he was caught out there by a so-called boyfriend who also attends his church. For whatever reason, that person sought to out him, and out of the bad decision to allow himself to be videotaped performing an act, a sex act on a man, that individual weaponized that against him and put it out there for many to see. Now, most of us became very aware of it once the pastor came on and felt he needed to do public address and apologize for his behavior and admit that he struggles, he's not perfect, and he wanted to repent before God and the people, and wanted people to work with him, continue to work with him as he got himself together. A lot of things in there. All right, I'll go backwards. Number one, a lot of Pentecostal preachers really have an overinflated idea of who they think they are, to the point where you need to go and do a public apology for something that's a very private matter, really, when it comes down to it. 99% of us would never have even heard of this thing unless this pastor had come online trying to apologize for something that none of us knew he did. Most of these preachers, their circle is so small that their next door neighbor doesn't even know they're a pastor. Their circle is so small, you couldn't Google their name and get 2 lines other than their own social media about what they are, who they are in their own community. So just a completely overinflation of who he thought he was, to the point that he felt he needed to come and do a public address like the President of the United States, that we needed to hear his public apology for putting somebody's ding-a-ling in his mouth. Okay? That's number one. Number two, this is a man, going back to my topic, this is a man, I'm sure, who has a very conservative belief of his Christianity and a very biblical-based belief of how he views homosexuality. I am sure that he has preached in the course of his lifetime against LGBTQ lifestyle. I'm pretty sure his conservative followers are the same. Hence his need to apologize for his gay sex act. So my question really is, how does he interpret himself? How does he interpret himself in context of his religion? Clearly, he sees what he did as sin. Therefore, he put himself in a position where he felt he needed to respond to being outed with that video, which is good. And now you have people who say, well, why is he apologizing? Right? Why doesn't he just come out of the closet, admit he's gay, and carry on with his life? And these are not just secular people. You have a large community, incredibly large community, and I'll use it very specifically for the context of African American homosexuals who are very active in churches. And not only are they active in churches, because you have all kinds of sexual predilections in churches. Like, let's just be honest, right? Any man or woman sitting in any church at any given time is subject to any type of sexual preference that you have no idea about. So let's start there. Then you have individuals who do have leanings towards homosexual lifestyle and are struggling with it, try to keep it down, not openly living a gay life, admit that they struggle with that, and yearn to live a heterosexual lifestyle by the grace of God. Right? That's where most conservative Christians want. That's what most of us want to hear about gay people. We want to hear tell us you're struggling, tell us you don't want to do it, tell us you want to be heterosexual like us, and you're okay, we'll give you a pass. That's where most conservative Christians live. They live there. Right? But then you have the ones who say, why do I need to be heterosexual? Did not God make me like this? Am I not serving God? Why is my identity a sin? Why is it considered a sin? And they also close their eyes to certain aspects of the Bible that say that. They shut their eyes to those things, and they carry on in a Judeo-Christian attempt to live a pro-LGBTQ life and still carry the moniker or the banner of Christianity. That is an interpretive life. That's a person who has decided to live a very specifically interpretive life, where they have said, there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. And I have an old adage, and I say, show me a man that knows that his sin is wrong, and I'll show you the perfect man. Show me a man who knows that his sin is wrong, and I'll show you the perfect man. That's a perfect man right there. Because he's a man who says, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I've been made carefully by God, but I sin, but I fall. Paul puts it, the Apostle Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, says, "O wretched man that I am, that which I don't want to do, that very thing I do." If I may paraphrase. And so most individuals live a life of perpetual self-introspection about their own frailty in respect to living to the mark of a righteous life in respect to biblical adherence. And they now say, my life, I interpret my life based on the rule of law called the Bible. And then you have others coming off of Pastor and his own story. I've been watching for those who know me, I'm a very big fan of Country Wayne. I watch all of his episodes. It's stress relief for me. It's comedic humor for me, and it's a soap opera that he's developed. And in the soap opera, there's a gentleman by the name of Mario. And Mario is a polygamist. living a polygamous lifestyle. He's a lawyer. He has 2 wives, and very happy polygamist, until one of his wives, who wasn't being very satisfied, I guess, decided to have an affair with another person in the office. That person himself was engaged to somebody else in the office, and the saga continues. Ultimately, the affair is found out, and Mario wants to divorce his wife, but he's not just divorcing one, he's divorcing both. And the story goes on in that direction, where both wives are taking him to the cleaners, and Mario's going through it because he was in a failed polygamous marriage, and now both wives are wiping his pockets clean. So we have the conversation now about polygamy, and I tell you right now, there's no topic that gets black women upset than that one, baby. Don't talk to no single black woman or married black woman or black woman who aspires to have her man and talk about polygamy. Don't start that conversation unless you're behind a very protective, bulletproof wall. Because nothing gets a black woman upset faster than talking about polygamy. Because there is a misconception, and I'm going to say it very clearly. Let me say this first and say that. There's a misconception that somehow polygamy is something that God does not approve of. All right, yeah, I said that properly. God has always approved of polygamy. Polygamy was something that was a thing, and most of the patriarchs were polygamists. So God had no issue with polygamy. He had conditions. God was not an advocate for polyamory. He's absolutely not an advocate for polyandry, which is multiple women with one man, or a woman having multiple men. Sorry, excuse me. Polygamy is one man, multiple women, married. Just understand that. A polygamist is a married man who has multiple wives. Can I say it again? A polygamist is a married man. They're all married. Those people are married. That's why God had no issue with polygamy, because polygamy satisfies the condition of covenant. God's a covenant-keeping God, period. And if you keep the covenant, he's good. You don't keep the covenant, he's not good. You don't keep the covenant in a one-man, one-woman relationship, which is what the evangelicals have started to advocate. God created one man and one woman, and that's what marriage is, and that's true. Marriage has always been about a man and a woman, not necessarily one man and one woman. One man and it's about one man, but it has always been the potential of having more than one woman. And why, again, has this been a great topic in the black community? Because I think black men have abused the idea. We have abused the idea. And the idea was never based on just simply the desires of a man to have multiple wives. If you look at some of the polygamists in the Bible, God bless you, Brian Holmes. I'm gonna use Sarai, that was her name at the time. Sarai and Abram. Abram wasn't looking for no bag of chicks. Abram was dealing with the fact that the one he had, who he loved very dearly, couldn't have children. Abram had never crossed his mind to say, let me pick up another one. Let me go get me another one. Abram was content with the one he had, and to the point where he was living with her for a very long time. She was an old woman by the time we get to her in the story. He's an old lady. By the time we get to Sarai, figure out who this lady is in the book of Genesis, she's an old woman. Abraham's an old man, and he's like, listen, God, I don't have an heir. And he didn't blame his wife. He just says, I don't have an heir. And I guess he couldn't blame her because he probably didn't know if it was him or her. Didn't know. It's not like he went to a doctor, a fertility clinic, and they said, Abraham, your boys are not swimming. They didn't say, hey, Sarai, Your eggs haven't been laid, girl. They didn't say, he didn't know. He just said, I don't have an heir. And he never made up in his mind that I was going to go get himself another woman. It was Sarai who said, hey, you got this fine black girl here that we just got out of Egypt, Hagar. She fine. She's my handmaiden. Go have a child with her. Well, Abraham didn't say no. Abraham didn't fuss about it. Now, let me put it two ways. He didn't go looking for another piece, and he hung in there with that good-looking old Afro-Semitic woman for a while. But when that young African was presented to him, he said, "Well, if you want, baby," he took it, right? She became his wife. I had a crazy white German professor in university. Actually, I learned more about African history from that white man than I did anyone else, other than my own personal studies. And it's quite embarrassing to say, but that white man had a little bit of information, but he was extremely skewed when it came to the Bible. And he said Abraham was a rapist. That's what he said. It's like, why would you ever say that? Now, at this time, I'd already read the book cover to cover, and I was definitely in my search at 20 years old. And so that struck a chord with me. What do you mean that Abraham was a rapist? He goes, well, he took his slave and he slept with her. That's rape. I was like, no. Come on, man. Stop it. Interpretive. The bondwoman. What was Hagar? The scripture calls her a handmaiden. Right? But then God refers to her as a bondwoman. What is a bondwoman? It's a woman that is tied to you by bond. She is, in fact, in servitude to you. So, therefore, she is to some extent a possession. But, again, a possession by choice. Because when Hagar decided to run away, ain't nobody went chasing her. She put herself in that position. Of course, because of the wealth and the capacity of Abram and his wife to take care of her. Abram, by that time, was a very rich man. So she was bonded to him. She was not necessarily a slave, but she was a servant, a bond servant, which is what God referred to her as when he says, the bondwoman's child shall not be the heir. For those who understand, read that story. But the point of the matter is, that the first polygamist we have is a man who was polygamous because his wife made him a polygamist. And that's how the true history of ancient polygamy operated. It was consensual by both wife and husband. These brothers weren't just running around bringing a girl home and saying, baby, this is a new one. Girl, look what I got down at the well. Ooh, I found this one at the market, baby. Listen, they weren't doing it like that. The modern mindset about polygamy is not the ancient mindset about polygamy. Modern men are like, listen, there's a lot of chicks out here. Kevin Samuels' approach said, listen, most of y'all women ain't ever going to get married to a high-value man, so you're going to have to share one. Y'all lost your mind. I think some of y'all tried to poison Kevin. Y'all lost your mind when Kevin said that. Hey, high-value men in the black community, that's 1%. You want one of him, you want to have to share him. Y'all ladies weren't going for that at all. You want your own individual prince. Again, interpretation. Many of you truly believe that there's some wealthy, rich man waiting there to take away all your sorrows and needs, and he's ready. He's gonna, because I mean, the number one thing that comes out of women's mouth, interpretive, when it comes to being a good man, he's a provider. He's a provider, right? That's what y'all believe. Miles Monroe put it, when a man was created, first thing God did is he gave him a job, put him in the garden. A man that don't work ain't under the auspices of God. That's Miles Monroe creating problems for people. But because Adam was not punching the clock. Adam didn't have to wake up and somebody shake him up and say, boy, it's 6 o'clock, you're gonna miss your bus to get to that garden, boy. He wasn't under that type of scenario. He was living a purposeful life, Miles. A purposeful life where he saw his creation as an extension of himself. And And even though God put him to till the ground, God put him there in respect to saying, go and conjugate your purpose, develop it, invest in it. And he did not have to toil, because that toil became a curse. Man was never created to toil in labor. Miles, but anyway, I'll go back to y'all ladies. The provisionary aspect. God bless you this morning, Carla. God bless you this morning. Shallow family. The provisionary aspect is something, again, that women became very interpretive of and said, listen, and modern women especially, if that man is not a provider, he's not a good man, right? And a provider is a very relative term, right? It's a very relative term. Because a poor man is a provider. A rich man, middle class man can be a provider. Provider is a relative term. It's an interpretive term. And we're trying to interpret all these things. And if a man is evaluated based on what his capacity is to bring financial remuneration to the table, then many of us have fallen short. Many of us. Just like if a woman is only measured by her beauty, if her value is only in how attractive she is, then many of you have no value. And these are not the appropriate ways to measure people. These are interpretive. These are very interpretive. And Martin gave us this very powerful sentence that most of us have heard many times, that I long for a day where I'm not judged by the color of my skin, but by what? By the content of my character, right? But even in Martin's sentence, I spoke to an equity committee, and I say Martin's sentence was incomplete because my value is still beyond the content of my character. Content of my character today might be very low, but it doesn't speak to my value. It doesn't. Malcolm X was in jail, and when he wasn't Malcolm, if somebody would have stopped and said, hey, this guy's worth nothing, they would have been evaluating him based on the current content of his character, but they would not have known his future. The Apostle Paul was evaluated by his Damascus Road agenda to murder and enslave and jail Christians. We would have said this guy has a very low character, but Jesus saw something better in him. So the content of my character is still not enough, if you will. It's still not enough to evaluate me. It's still interpretive, because who gives you the right to evaluate and weigh my character, to say whether or not I have value? And this was the 50s and 60s Negro experience, which that black people desire to say, let me lift my character so high that white people will have to say I'm a good Negro. Still, that bar falls short, because they weren't evaluating you based on your character. They were evaluating, saying you're black and therefore your value is low. Period. I don't care what you are, Negro. You still, if you can sing good, you still can't stay in this hotel. You still, if you can dance, you still can't come up this elevator. Still, if you're a world champion, you still can't drink out of this fountain. So the content of your character to them was irrelevant. It was irrelevant. It didn't change anything for you. It didn't change a doggone thing for you. And so, again, when you live these interpretive lives, sometimes the empiricalness of how you should think, see, and live, they are lost to you. They're lost to you. And I long for a day where these types of ideas and these thoughts and these conversations, they take us to another place. America is dealing with an interpretive lifestyle right now. It is very clear. It is very clear that no longer is the world really being run by the people that are sitting in your particular capitals and sitting behind those desks. Is the world being run by presidents and prime ministers and kings, or is the world being run by oligarchs and multinational companies and billionaires with super world-defying agendas? You're sitting around voting, saying, "Oh yeah, we need a guy to run this country." You know, is that who's running the world? Does the guy who run the world, again interpretive, The guy who was elected president? Or is the guy who runs the world the guy who paid for that campaign for that guy to become president? Interpret it.
Hi.
Hello. Can I have a steak and egg homestyle biscuit by itself?
It's steak and egg?
Yep, thank you.
How many ones?
One. Lord, how many more I'm gonna eat this month? Interpretive. She couldn't understand. I just wanted one steak and egg doggone sandwich. Listen, let me wind this up. The biblical prophet and the king had one very important job, and it's the same job you have today. It was interpreting what God's agenda was for the time. That's where I'm coming. I brought all this to come here, because coming here it wouldn't have been exciting. I had to build it up. One very intent understanding that you must have is, what is the interpretation of what God needs me to do? Let me tell you something. Many of you are sitting there thinking, well, I'm not a politician, I'm not this, I'm not that. I love that ain't the point. The point isn't what you are today. The point is who you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to do, and what you're supposed to accomplish. That's the point. And if you live a life, thank you, if you live a life where you believe, oh, well, I'm just a guy here on YouTube talking to people, inspiring them so I can build content and, hopefully, have a bunch of followers, and I want to be an influencer. You missed the point of your life. If you're a person that thinks, I got a regular job, or I think my purpose is to build my skincare company, or my purpose is to, Adonai Skincare, God bless you, hail up to you, or my purpose is, to provide the world with spices and be a spice man. You missed the point. My purpose is to simply be, an evangelist. Listen to me. The world has not changed since biblical times. You go back and look. The world hasn't changed. God uses little people to do little things that are so significant that if they did not do them, things would not happen. I have so many stories of it, but one that comes to mind, and I'll use that one. The little slave girl in Syria who was serving a general by the name of Naaman's wife. This little girl had been taken captive. And we might have looked at her life and said, or her parents might have been like, oh my gosh, what has happened to my daughter? This little girl, God, how could you allow it? How could you allow this child to be taken captive? But unbeknownst to them, she was a slave that was well taken care of. And this young girl, when she saw the leprosy of her mistress's husband, spoke and said, Mistress, there's a prophet in Israel who can heal him. Now, she had no idea that people were sitting there listening on her words. She had no idea that individuals were watching her. And out of her mouth came a biblical narrative where Naaman is told by his own king, through the whispers of his little intelligent spies, there's apparently a prophet that has the power to heal Naaman. Causes an international incursion where the king writes a letter to the king of Israel and says, hey, I'm sending my servant Naaman, heal him. What? This man thinks I'm God? He thinks I'm God, that he seeks a problem with me? That how can I heal a man of leprosy? The king is shook, doesn't know what to do. But God has an occasion. God has a plan. And the prophetic mind says, no, 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 tell the king, send that boy to me. Man, listen, from the slave girl to the spy to the mistress to Naaman to the king, both kings, there's an interpretive plan that is always being developed for a people that God might show himself to be God. And if you sit in a position where you are, God's out here, you know, you're a generalist. If you sit in a position where you're kind of a skeptic, if you sit in an agnostic position, if you're a complete unbeliever, that doesn't matter. There is an interpretive plan that is being developed. You might fall under the plan. You might be part of the plan. You might be the orchestrator of the plan. But I'm here to let you know that God has a plan that you need to understand. There's seasons. Right now, this season that you are in a great season where the United States is about to change. Canada is about to change. Africa is changing. China is changing. Russia, don't play with them. The Wagner Group, don't play with them. The world is on a change spectrum right now. And the Bible text talks about it. Talks about, you know, some of y'all are going to go, you're still getting married, you're still loving life, you're still doing all the things that you're doing when God has major agendas happening. We're in the last day eschatology of great moves and shifts. Empires are falling and new things are rising up. It is an important time to keep your mind focused on what is around you, what is happening, what is taking place. In closing, because I'm going to go lift some weights right now, I'm early. One of the biggest problems I have in life is I am a champion of loss. I have been married, I've been divorced, I've lost houses, I've lost family, I've lost businesses, I've had churches had to be closed, I've had my character attacked, I've had so many things happen to me. And I sit back and I say, God, what's the purpose of all this, man? And I'm like, I'm still in my right mind, I'm still healthy, I'm still good looking, thank you. I still have the capacity to look at that Bible, look at that word, look at my life and say, God must have a purpose. And I sit here waiting for purpose to happen in me and in you. This platform was put here for a reason. I say to you, all of you, be inquisitors today about purpose. Allow your understanding to take a back seat to your inspiration and your expectation today of what is the plan. That's what I want. You start asking the right questions, you're going to get the right answers. God, what's the plan here? Because is this it? Is this all it is? I've said that many times in my life, and I've lived a million different lives. It's not all it is. I don't care where you are. I don't care where you sit. I don't care what age demographic you think you are in. What's happening right now, if you're under the sound of my voice, there's more happening. It's interpretive. Get the interpretation. God bless you. Have an amazing day. And share this with somebody, because somebody needs to hear this. Del K. Brereton, this is The Real Spiel. More is coming.